Welcome to FP&A Fast Track, your source for FP&A resources to put your career on the fast track. Welcome, everybody. My guest today on the podcast is Jack Tompkins, who is founder and are you CEO? What's your official title? CEO at Pineapple Consulting Group. I will let him give you a little bit of his background on who he is, what he does, and who the typical clients are that he serves, and then we'll go from there. Jack, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure thing. Thanks for having me, John. Very much appreciate it.
Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, of course. I always love chatting with you. Yeah, I guess background on me. I do love pineapples. That is part of the name. I don't consult them though. We do stuff with like data and analytics for small businesses, but grew up in Connecticut, which is pretty boring. Our biggest draw was come live in Connecticut so you can leave on the weekends and go to New York or Boston. But been in Charlotte for about 4 years at the time of this recording. So early 2019, I think I moved down here and have loved it, every part of it ever since, especially the small business community. And definitely don't see myself leaving anytime soon.
So what was it specifically about Charlotte? I mean, you're obviously near some other big cities.
Yeah, it was, I knew I wanted to go south. I was pretty done with the cold, which I know is about the most generic answer that people give. But Charlotte checked all the right boxes. The only one it didn't check was it's not super close to the ocean. We got Lake Norman, we got Lake Wylie, so we got some water, but young city in parts, you can get to the suburbs in 5 seconds. You know, you can have any sort of day that you want. It's constantly growing. New people, I think it's still probably around 100 people a day move here. New things, new restaurants, all sorts of stuff. Very vibrant city. And there's a lot going on. And that was the biggest draw, but it checked all the boxes.
Yep. Yeah, I have to agree. I moved here in 2007 and it was a similar thing. Not getting away from the cold. I actually came from South Florida. But it was a handful of other things. I kind of just wanted to, I had lived in South Florida for so long and it had just grown so much. It just felt overcrowded. And I was looking for kind of that happy medium, you know, big city, but I live in Harrisburg, which is about 20 minutes outside of Uptown. So it feels like I'm in a small town, but I'm 20 minutes from Uptown. What area of Charlotte are you in, by the way?
I'm in Huntersville right now. It's like right near Birkdale, if folks are familiar, right near the lake.
Yeah. I like Birkdale.
Yeah.
It's a nice area.
Yeah, also very new, also plans for expansion and all sorts of stuff. And I got my water fixed. I'm close to the water now, which is nice.
Cool. That's very cool. Yeah, I guess we're like 4-ish hours from the beach?
Yeah, depending on the beach, but yeah, it's kind of tough to do a day trip for sure.
Yeah. It's I would, one of the main criteria for me was the mild weather that we have here, right? So I lived through 2 Category 5 hurricanes and lost everything I owned twice. So I was like, I really don't want that third strike. And I was looking for someplace where the weather, I mean, this to me fit the bill perfectly. We do get the seasons, but it's not extremely hot or extremely cold. And frankly, we can drive to a lot of stuff. I mean, we drive to the mountains, we drive to the beach. You get to the lake pretty quickly. So, so your business is Pineapple Consulting. Tell me a little bit about, first of all, why the name Pineapple? I know there's a story behind it, but I'm sure people that are not familiar with it would love to hear the story. So why the name, and then what exactly do you do?
Yeah. So the story behind the name, it genuinely did kind of start out with, I really like pineapples and that's kind of fun, but moving down to Charlotte, I wanted to embrace Southern hospitality. So the sign of that is, as a lot of people know, like when a neighbor moves in next door, you bring them a pineapple, welcome to the neighborhood. So it's sort of that symbolism and very, very contrasting to data, which is what we do, which we'll talk about in a second. But data, very boring, hospitality, very inviting and warm. The third reason is pineapples are very vacation type of symbol for me. So I always say if I could help a small business owner take a true vacation, go grab a pina colada, drink it out of a pineapple on a beach somewhere, that's kind of the overall goal and have that nice vacation feeling. Again, completely opposite of data, which is our day-to-day thing of making data dashboards, presenting data so it's digestible, usable. I like to say that we don't really sell a dashboard. We sell access to the information in your business and data-driven strategies and things like that, the vehicle that we choose to use is the actual data dashboard and presenting everything visually.
Okay, very cool. So the timing on this is actually really fortuitous for me because I'm in the process of one of my longtime clients asked me to send like an updated course list. And I do have a course on data visualization, which for those of you out there, Jack helped me to update some of the visuals that I use in my PowerPoint. So it kind of took me out of the dark ages into what Jack and his company are doing now, which is a lot better than what I was doing before. I'll just put it that way. So how exactly did you get into, so I know you have a background that is more than just the data visualization piece, right? So you've kind of done a lot of different things in data analysis and product work. What was it that kind of led you more into focusing on the data visualization piece of things?
Yeah, it's kind of a weird niche, right? So everybody hears about data, but data visualization is relatively new in the scope of things. But I really liked it because it levels the playing field. And to me, I've always been a math nerd, and I like the story I tell sometimes is my high school math teacher was out for a week or 2 weeks or something like that, and we had homework to do. The substitute didn't really know math, so people knew that I knew the homework, so I got up and started teaching the class, and then I taught the class for the week. And it was
cool.
it was great. I loved it, and it's really not a bragging situation. It's just that stuff clicked for me. It was more the fact that I wanted to be able to make something that clicked for me understandable to everybody else.
Yeah.
And that was a whole lot of fun. And that's what I find in business now is that data visualization, creating this, branded with brand colors and stuff like that, trends and indicators and all that important KPI type stuff. It has that same feeling of here's exactly what your data is saying in the exact format that you want it with your exact colors. And it makes data feel less like data. You can get the answers you're looking for in 15 seconds as opposed to calling an analyst and digging into it for 5 hours.
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the things that I thought about when I thought about data visualization, some of the things that it allows people to do very quickly that you can't really do any other way, at least not as quickly and effectively, is it lets you see trends much quicker, right? It allows you to see things that are kind of anomalies, right? Like that one of these things is not like the other type of thing. It lets you see outliers, exceptions, things like that kind of jump out. So I'm curious with most of the folks that you deal with, are dashboards new to them? Or is it something where they've worked with them before, but they just kind of want to take it to the next level, bringing you in?
A little bit of both, honestly. A lot of people have, so most software out there, I mean, from QuickBooks to CRMs to inventory stuff, everything like that, most of them have some sort of generic dashboard presentation that they give you. So a lot of people are familiar with it from that perspective. Those dashboards are never what folks are looking for. It's a great first step, and I try not to knock them a lot. It's just they're not customized to the individual person, of course.
Yeah.
So some people have that level of exposure. Some people have internal custom dashboards, and they'll bring me on to either improve them, make it more automated, make it more visual, add to it, incorporate other data sources, things like that. And they have that awareness, and therefore they know what they want because they can see like, all right, well, we're kind of dipping into it. Really want is this. And then I help them kind of bridge the gap. But I would say in general, most have some exposure. Some are like, holy crap, this would be great. Let's try it out. And we do that too.
Cool. So when you're working with them, how much do you get into helping them identify, not just designing the actual like physical layout of the dashboard, but one of the things I've noticed when I used to do consulting work is a lot of times some of the clients are not even looking at the right data. So even if you put it in a dashboard and made it look really cool, it's not really the data that's going to help them make the types of decisions that they need to be able to make to move their business forward. So I'm curious, what are some of the things that you do to help them sift through all the data that they have to figure out, first of all, what do we want to put on that dashboard before we even talk about the colors and the layout and all that good stuff?
Yeah, I'm so glad you bring this up. It's so important because I am one of the most data-driven people that you'll ever meet. And I love data and looking at it. Looking at data for the sake of data is not useful though. It's just not.
Yeah.
Right. And so to your point, like what do we actually want to know from this data? And so we tie it back to a business goal, right? Everything kind of comes back to, all right, if we, simple example, want to grow revenue, great. What's our current revenue? What do we want to get it to? How are we going to get there? All right. Well, we've got all those pieces in place. Now let's go find the data. Let's put it into the visuals, make it make sense. Let's tie it to that business goal and keep it trending in that way. And obviously you can go with a lot of different directions with that, but it's a conversation that we have a lot. A lot of people do come in with very good ideas, thoughts, questions, comments, concerns, all that good stuff. But that's an important step one for sure.
Yeah. Well, speaking of step one, as you were talking, it made me think about, let's step back a little bit to give the audience a little bit of context. So I know this is what you do now. How long have you been doing this specific type of work with Pineapple? When did you start Pineapple?
About 3 years, April 2020.
3 years. Okay. So let's go back way back in the Wayback Machine when you were a little kid. What did you, so I was an accountant before I got into doing training, right? But I did not ever, when I was a kid, think I want to be an accountant, right? So I'm always curious, when you were a little kid and you were thinking about whatever those thoughts were about what you might want to do when you grew up, what were some of the things that you thought about when you were a kid? And does it tie at all to what you're doing now?
I don't think shortstop for the New York Yankees ties into data very much, but
Okay.
that was the initial goal. But once I, started getting the hang of, all right, what are some realistic career options? Teacher was up there, which kind of ties in because I wanted to be in high school an AP math teacher. So doing the advanced level classes and stuff. So I guess that ties in a bit because it's the same. Let me take something that's unfamiliar and to a lot of people, they don't like it and make it useful. I was all over the map. I mean, I had 17 different majors in college and I'm just making my own from.
Wow, yeah. Dude, I had 6 and almost everyone I've ever talked to is like, holy crap, that's a lot. You just blew mine out of the water. 17.
Yeah, I officially applied in the school, et cetera, with 5. But like a legitimate career path focus, I'm going to do this at least in my own head on paper, talking with my parents and stuff, 17. So I've been all, and it's, teaching to physics, to kinesiology, how the body moves. And I think all that was just, I love to learn. I think a lot of stuff is really cool. And I guess if I combine the early childhood goal of math teacher with this desire to learn, data is constantly changing, programs are constantly changing, software is constantly changing, clients are changing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this whole using data, making it understandable for clients in a variety of industry sizes, et cetera, kind of really is, I guess, I've never really thought about this, but I guess that is kind of a nice combination of everything.
Yeah, it does kind of tie in, like always learning, your love of math. Yeah, I can see. And believe it or not, as completely different as accounting is from what I wanted to do when I was a kid, there was an actual direct connection of connecting the dots. It just got decoupled at some point. I read a book when I was a kid about this FBI agent. It was like an autobiography. And I thought, I want to be an FBI agent. And then I found out in college that the FBI has a white collar crime division and they recruit CPA. So I thought, that's what I'm going to do. And either fortunately or unfortunately for me, the semester I graduated, they had a nationwide like federal hiring freeze. So that got taken off the table and I ended up in public accounting, but it wouldn't have really mattered because I think this is where I kind of belong anyway, kind of finding my way here. So 5 different majors. What did your major end up with? What did you get your degree in first?
Degree is officially, so I made up my own major. So it is officially called, I know, which makes sense after that, but a Bachelor of Science in Investment Analysis.
Okay.
Yeah,
Did you ever pursue your, is it the CFA? Was that ever
I looked,
anything ever of interest?
yeah, it was definitely of interest. I looked into it. There were a few different designations that I looked into. Um, and honestly, the work that I had in the corporate life didn't tie directly to it. And I was really focused on that. And then I was really focused on family stuff. And then was like, all right, let me just try and build something on the side. And I did. So I've been kind of focused on pineapple since then. But I think those designations are great. I know they're a lot of work,
Yeah.
but I never dove too deep into them.
Yeah. The CSA, I know I looked at the CFA years and years ago. And I pretty quickly determined that uh, it was just too much of an investment of time and money for what I was probably going to do with it, which was really just put it at after, the letters after my name. And I didn't want to be an investment analyst. I just thought, kind of like yourself, I was always fascinated. So I started in accounting, but then I worked in corporate finance. And I worked in mergers and acquisitions. So there was a lot of math, a lot of financial analysis, a lot of financial statement analysis, and all kinds of different things that kind of played into that. But then I realized the more experience I got, that what seemed more valuable was the more of the experience of structuring deals and strategy, more so than the hardcore analysis. Um,
Okay.
and I'm kind of curious, actually. So when we talk about dashboarding and data visualization of any type, what are some of the strategic things that you can incorporate? Because obviously, KPIs, or I have a friend who's big into OKRs, OKRs.
hmm
Actually wrote a book about it, um, and does a bunch of coaching around it. But I'm curious, what are some of the strategy level things that you can help people incorporate into their visualizations?
Yeah, it's a good question. So there's sort of the data side of strategy, or I shouldn't say the data side of strategy, the data strategy side of things, meaning should we use this platform because it integrates well with that platform? And then there's the actual business strategy that comes from the data that we talk about. And so those are things typically around growth or profitability, which obviously, I mean, pretty two generic answers there, but everything ties back to, like I said, those business goals. And so when we talk strategy, I have some folks that look at things kind of like on an employee basis as a tangible example. And so it goes into strategy for the business of, if we grow to the revenue that we want, we're going to be, this amount profitable, et cetera. We're going to need so many different people. And then once we hit a certain metric of an hourly rate or an efficiency or people working however much, then it's time to hire. So some people use it as that cue of, we're growing and we're going to keep growing. That's the plan. And now we need to hire because of it. So there's a lot of those
So
different things. It's all very custom. Go ahead.
yeah. So as you're talking, I was thinking, it sounds like there are a lot of these things that maybe are like a step function, right? Like
Yeah.
we don't need to hire people until we get to a certain point, but then we're not kind of ramping up in a linear way because we might need office space and equipment and furniture and computers and all that. And so we're not going to buy those onesie twosie. We're probably going to do it in a stepwise fashion. Are some of the things they look at things like revenue per employee, square feet per employee, gross profit, G&A? Like what types of like headcount associated metrics are they typically looking at? And I'm sure, to your
Revenue.
point, I'm sure it varies a lot by company.
Yeah, and it does, and it always will, which is kind of the fun of it. But revenue per employee is the most consistent one. Um, uh, there's a few others. I mean, it's really pick your favorite balance sheet, or excuse me, profit and loss statement section, and do that per employee. Revenue, expenses, COGS doesn't really get in there, but profit per employee gets in there. And then this isn't totally a by employee thing, but things like hourly rate for service-based businesses.
Mhm.
And that, I mean, you do break it down by employee. So it's a by employee, not per employee, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
Yeah, some of the bigger line items on an income statement get checked out.
Do you notice I've listened to a lot of podcasts of some of these guys that are more in the digital space, right? A lot more digital products. And I get the sense that, like when I worked at Royal Caribbean Cruises, for example, everything we looked at there was an acronym that everything was measured by. It was the denominator for everything: potential passenger cruise days, right? You take the number of shifts, the number of cabins, the number of days that they're going to be actually bookable because they've got to be out of the water for repairs for a certain amount of time. That becomes your denominator. And then every single thing we measure by that, right? I've noticed with a lot of the online businesses, they talk a lot more about things like lifetime value of a customer, right? Acquisition costs, which I don't remember us talking a lot about that when I worked at these big companies like a Royal Caribbean or AutoNation. We were thinking in more, what I would look at is more kind of traditional metrics. But the more I hear people talk about some of these metrics, I start to wonder why weren't we anyway? I can't speak for other companies. Why weren't we looking at things like our lifetime value or acquisition costs? Are those metrics that you see a lot of companies paying more attention to now?
I don't know if I'd say more companies. We did look, so I worked in insurance for a while, and we did look at lifetime value a decent amount. Cost per acquisition was kind of in there. And it's I don't want to say business dependent. It's almost marketing team dependent or CEO dependent or something. It's more whoever's
There's some
running that
culture to it.
decision. Yeah, exactly. Because maybe for Royal Caribbean, it was, we know we're getting people, so we don't really care what the cost of acquisition is. People are always going to come, and maybe everybody only takes 2 cruises or whatever. That's sort of the business dependency of it. But I do find that with heavy marketing companies, those things come up a lot. Not meaning marketing agencies, but like if a manufacturing company or anybody does some really, really strategic heavy marketing, those will be some really big things. If they don't do that, or if the marketing team doesn't think about it as priority one, or the CEO or whoever, it's an afterthought. It's still on the table, but it's definitely more of an afterthought.
Yeah, that's interesting. That the culture, I definitely sense that with the culture. And I think you're right. I think at Royal Caribbean, some of the lack of focus on some of those metrics was probably because they felt like, based on experience, that they ran at a 90-something% occupancy rate on all ships all the time. And I think to their detriment, that they kind of took their foot off the gas on some of their marketing efforts because of it. I remember right before I left, they were just finishing one of the new ships, and I had to go to the VP of sales and tell him, the CFO just told me we're cutting the sales and marketing budget by 5%. Oh, by the way, we're getting a new ship, right? So he's got to sell a whole new ship all year long worth of cabins, but we're cutting his sales and marketing budget. And the CFO was like, yeah, but we always run 90 whatever percent occupancy, and we always have. And we keep building new ships, and it never goes down.
Wow.
And I just thought, I was just a financial analyst, right? I was more stressed out about having to tell a VP that his budget's getting cut. Now I got to sit there and work out the details with him on how we're going to do it. But then I think about, when I left there, I went to Arby's and worked in their planning department, and they had just done a huge corporate reorganization, and their whole focus was much more operations focused. They had just raided a bunch of people from PepsiCo who had turned around a bunch of their stores. That was back when PepsiCo owned the Taco Bell, Pizza Hut, and what's the other one? Taco Bell, Pizza, KFC.
Before they sold them brands.
Yeah.
Okay.
So they put those 3 together years before, and they wrapped it up and sold it to Yum Brands. But I got there right when they had just put those together. So they had raided some of those guys that had turned all those stores around, and it was totally operations focused, which was very different from Royal Caribbean, which was, they were more about pinching the pennies.
Interesting.
So yeah, and it was a cultural thing. It was very much a cultural thing.
So what were they looking at operationally? Like, as much as you can disclose, obviously, like what was an operational metric that they were focused on?
Less operational metrics and more getting the financial guys to understand operations better, so that we understood how everything worked together. So I'll give you an example. So we split up all of the stores, like all retail does, into different regions. I had the Western region. I had 89 stores out in the West, right? So I think it was like the second week I was there, after I did like some basic kind of, orientation stuff. The first thing they wanted me to do is go out and have a meeting with the regional director of operations. So he had all those stores that rolled up to him. Then under him, he had district managers, and then they had store managers. They wanted me to go and sit in the meetings that they had. They had like a weekly meeting with the regional, and then they would break up into the districts. And part of my job was to do their budgets and then work on the variance analysis each month. And then if they needed any kind of capital projects, I would help them get that stuff approved. And anything related to money, I was kind of their go-to guy, right? If they needed information or analysis or whatever. And what I realized really quickly was it helped me connect the dots on, I'll give you an example. We had a store where a car drove into the bathroom. This guy just lost control of his car and just drove right into the building. And the car was like in the bathroom.
Whoa.
Right. So, they get the car out of there and they try to repair it the best they can. And they put it at capital appropriations request. And you worked for some big companies, so I'm sure you can imagine all of the ridiculous bureaucracy involved. Well, there's a very specific process, and there are forms that they have to fill out, and I have to do some analysis, and I have to interview them and get certain, and all this stuff. And the regional director gets on the phone. He says, "Hey, John, I need to talk to you." And he explains the whole thing to me. And I said, "Hey, don't worry about it, man. I'm going to do whatever I can to push this through." And I go and I talk to the department head, and he's like, "Well, you know the process. You got to do this. And I'm going, "Dude, they literally have a hole in their back room. Like they're missing a wall." Like, I've been to the store. It's very different when you physically walk into the store and you see people walking in and immediately walking out. And you got a VP back at corporate who's totally detached from everything. And he's like, "Well, hey, why are sales down? And now they're asking for money on top of it." Dude, go see the store. Put your like store manager hat on and picture people walking into a store with a big hole in it. That for me was the biggest value. And I used to talk to people when I did consulting, and I used a phrase I used to call SWOT on the fly, meaning most people have heard of a SWOT analysis, right? Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Well, that's great. You do that once a year, you put it into a plan, and it goes into a binder and it goes on a shelf somewhere, or it gets filed away somewhere, right?
Yep.
I used to talk to people when I was in consulting about, do your SWOT analysis on the fly as you're walking around. Get the heck up out of your cubicle, out of your office, and go walk around into those departments that you support. Do you even know what it looks like in the sales department? Do you know what the physical layout is? Do you know what the challenges that they deal with on a daily basis when they can't get information that they're calling us for? Right? Go find out what those things are and learn more about the operations side of it. So when somebody calls and they need your help for something specific you do for them, you've got a lot more context for it.
Yeah.
Right?
That's so important. Even putting your customer hat on, like, would you walk into a store that has a hole in it? Probably not.
We had the same issue. There was a store that for years had been putting in capital appropriations requests to fix their parking lot. And the guys at corporate had never been to the store. And it was one of my stores. So the first time I went out, I called my boss and I was like, "Dude, you got to see this. This is ridiculous. People drive into the parking lot and there's these giant potholes and they turn around and they leave."
Yeah.
But sitting at a desk at corporate, he's looking at the numbers and he's going, "I don't know why these guys' margins aren't any better. They're running promotions all the time, trying to get people in, and then people come in and they leave."
I love it. Because I mean, to that point and selfishly bringing it back to data, the data tells a story. It may not be the full story because you need to go see things. You need to talk to the people. And that's such a good example because I feel like that happens all the time. Obviously, that's very tangible. There's potholes, there's a hole in the wall, etc. I feel like that happens all the time, even if it's just the classic sales isn't talking to marketing kind of thing. I love it. That's perfect.
The bricks and mortar stuff is a lot easier to see those issues because you can physically see it. But even something like a reservations department, when I was at Royal Caribbean, they put in a capital appropriations request for like a new reservation software. And it was like millions of dollars, right? And the CFO sees the proposal and he's like, "I don't understand. We're running 90-something% occupancy. We fill the ships all the time. What do we need to spend all this money on software for? Because I need you go and talk to the VP of reservations and I want an explanation. So I go and I sit down with the VP and she goes, all right, I'm going to show you. I'm going to make this very simple because I think seeing it will make a lot more sense. So she took me and stood me in the cubicle, one of their top reservations agents. And I sat there and watched while he was going back and forth between different systems while he had a customer on the line. And he was switching back and forth between a reservation system, some app where they had all the different promotions that they had. There was like 3 or 4 or 5 different windows that he kept having to go back and forth between. And then they had old computers and sometimes it would freeze up. And you've got somebody on the line and they're booking a reservation and our reservations agents are trying to upsell them on shore excursions. And wouldn't you like to have a cabin that's got a window instead of an inside? Right. So they're literally missing hundreds or thousands of dollars of extra revenue because these guys are struggling with their system and the customer on the other end gets frustrated and says, you know what? I'm good with what we have. Thanks. Just book that and we're out of here. Right.
Yeah.
And then he gets off the phone. Now his numbers don't look good as a reservation agent, right? If you're comparing them to lots of different metrics, one of which, by the way, was talk time. So they had a sweet spot of talk time. They don't want you getting them off the phone too quickly because then you're not giving them good service, but too long and maybe you're not being efficient enough. Right. And part of the reason they couldn't hit their sweet spot was because the systems were outdated. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. I've seen that. At back in my insurance shop at the Hartford, the customer service reps that people would call in. They've got a lot of personal lines for AARP members. So it's at the time I was working, you'd get an 80-year-old, 90-year-old call pretty commonly. That was a normal call, and the folks on the back end were absolute magicians. They'd have 3 screens, 2 applications per screen, and it seems like they had 12 eyes looking at everything and going back and forth on ABC and all this stuff. I give them all sorts of credit because it was impressive. But to your point, though, that was one system, completely different story, right? Or 2, like something reasonable. But the seeing is believing. Totally.
Yeah, that's one of the things when I talk about it, just in general, for almost everything in life, context is critical. And if you don't understand where that person is coming from, why are they asking for all this money for this capital project? And you have a form that captures all this data and it's got like about this much space, like 2 inches of space for you to type open text to give just a plain English verbal explanation of why. And then everything else is metrics. What's the IRR? What's the NPV? What's the payback? All these metrics that they want to look at. And CFOs, they deal with this stuff all day long. This is not a big fish for them to fry on a regular basis, right? They're worried about the conference call they have with the Wall Street analysts that are going to grill them about their EPS for, the coming quarter and all this stuff. And here I am with a little capital appropriations request for some software.
Right.
Right. And it just so happens that the CFO kind of had a thing for hardware because the previous company he came from, he just felt like there were lots of overspending on IT. So everything IT related, he just had really sharpened his pencil.
Gotcha. That's tough. That's a whole nother bucket we get into, I'm sure. But it's funny. It's bigger fish to fry always, I'm sure.
So multiple 5 to 17 different majors, depending on if you're looking at official or unofficial. And then you finally settle on the one that you've finished up. What were some of the hurdles or some of the things that made you say no to 16 of the 17 and finally settle on that investment analysis? And was it actually hurdles or was it more that you just loved that one thing more?
There was probably some of both. My initial thing that comes to my mind is looking long term of could I see myself doing whatever the major of the day was. And so for the physics majors, because there were 1 or 2 of them in there, I really liked light. So I was dealing with lasers and sunlight and all this other stuff. Very, very interesting stuff to me being a super nerd. could I see myself doing that long time and spending 8 hours in a lab for, probably 10 years or so, being whatever the junior lab associate person is, and not being able to run the show or anything? I couldn't see it. So that was, I guess, a hurdle of sorts. Actuarial was one of mine, obviously. Very, very, statistic based, lots of exams and stuff like that. Could I see myself doing that? Well, I liked a lot of it, but not totally. So I kind of just picked my favorites from each of the different majors that I had. And some of it was just a learning mentality. Some of it was actual coursework, and molded that into the final one that I went to UConn. They have a individualized major program. So you can go in and say, hey, I want to do, these 12 different courses, whatever. Can we make a major out of it? And people come in, normally wanted to combine like English, history, and things like that. And I came in wanting finance, business, math, statistics, economics, all that stuff. I'm like, we don't know what you're talking about. Just go for it. Make a 4-year plan. We'll sign off. So it was some hurdles, some pull up.
But that doesn't actually seem like it's all over the place. Because when I think of, I have a bachelor's in accounting, and I had to take 2 econ courses, several financial analysis, exclusive of the specific accounting classes. All that stuff you talked about are things that we had to take as part of the core curriculum in the business school, regardless of which business major you were going to do. And if you were going to major in management, well, then once you got to a certain level, all the rest were management. If it was marketing, you go that way. But I mean, I got a little bit of marketing, a little bit of management, a little bit of finance, econ, statistics, systems, all of that stuff before we got, deeper into the actual accounting stuff. So to me, it doesn't sound that unusual, just a little bit more customized to you than maybe a more generic one. But topically, it's not that far off from what I experienced anyway.
Yeah, I would imagine it's probably similar to the point of like getting to know the context and the business too. I do like that they make you take the marketing, the accounting, the management, all that different stuff. So you at least kind of have an idea once you get into the real world. But my thought was, let's get an idea of as many things as possible, and then kind of pick from there. But excluding the higher level finance, actuarial, some of the other courses, there's all kind of just common stuff that you take in business school.
Yeah, there's it makes me think about it. I'm not going to remember the quote exactly, but the general idea of it is that without having a certain amount of base knowledge, you don't have the context to develop certain types of insights, right? And I guess there's an example I use in one of the courses that I do, and it's may not be the best example, but these 2 cops in a car. One is the training officer, and one of them is like the new guy, right? Just finished the police academy. They're stopped at a red light, and there's a car in front of them. And the guy in the car in front of them, the younger cop, sees him just like flick a cigarette and flick the ashes from the cigarette, like right on the seat in the car. And he kind of looks at the car and he's like, that's a brand new BMW. This guy's flicking ashes on the seat. And something just didn't seem right. It just seemed out of place. So they run the plates, and sure enough, something didn't seem right. They pulled him over. It was a stolen car. And the older cop asked him after everything is over with, he's like, what was it that made you think, maybe we should run the plates or whatever? And he goes, it just didn't seem to fit. Something was out of place. You got a brand new, beautiful BMW. Even if you're a smoker, who flicks their ashes on the seat of their own car, right?
Yes.
So he was all of that was bouncing off a lifetime of experiences, right? Of going, well, in a stolen car, who gives a crap, right? But if that's my brand new car, that just doesn't fit. But it's having those experiences in his memory bank to be able to connect the dots to say that it's very different from going, well, I don't need to memorize a lot of stuff because I can just Google it. Well, what are you going to Google in that situation? There's no question to Google. You have to have the existing bank of experiences to refer to go, one of these things is not like the other, right? Again, that context.
Yeah, that's a good story. I like it. That's funny.
I'm curious about, I see in your LinkedIn profile when you're at the Hartford, it lists a leadership development program that I'm curious about. I did some training for United Technologies, which coincidentally was up in Connecticut, and
Yep.
they have like a whole training campus there, which blew me away. It's one of the few companies I've been to where every single person that was in that training was in a leadership development program. And they had periodic meetings with mentors. And some of them, at a certain point in their career, they would get to choose a different business unit or segment or department to go work in for like 6 months. And it was just like, it was a whole formalized program. So I'm curious, what was the leadership development program at the Hartford like? And how did that help you kind of develop?
Yeah, it was very good. I give all the praise in the world to them. And I'm actually familiar with United Technologies a little bit too, to your point, based out of Hartford. So I knew a lot of people going through the same stuff. Both really good programs. It's becoming more and more common, which is great. At the Hartford, it was a 3-year program and would have rotations. So you'd typically, me being the one-off that I have been, especially in my college career, this was no exception. Mine was a little bit different, but typically it is 3 years and you do 3 1-year rotations. So you get, you're in a specific track. So I was in the product management track. So, super easy examples I would do: auto insurance, home insurance, and then small commercial insurance. Those are some common 3. Other people were in an IT track, other people in a marketing track. There are a few other ones too. And so you'd have your rotations there. You'd have professional development, which generally on 20% of your time. And then there were things that you could do sort of extracurricularly to an extent. Starts off with the intern program that's worked very similarly, where you have one rotation, professional development, and then what we call a capstone, a group project kind of thing. That worked really well. So that it's engineered to give you a lot of different experiences with some leadership capacity. So I ended up going all over the place. I ended up running the company's intern program as one of my like sort of side pieces, that extracurricular thing. And that was amazing leadership. I think I was probably 24 at the time and had 7 direct reports that were full-time people, and then 120 interns that were sort of flowed through the program that I was creating. Huge leadership, awesome experience. I also managed the relationship between us and 2 other big insurance companies, because we had a very specific offering for both of them. And I just kind of stepped into that role, kind of fell into it because I knew the folks that were running it. One went on a maternity leave, and I kind of jokingly said, "Hey, my rotation's coming up. Maybe I'll just fill in for you while you're on maternity leave." And she goes, "Okay." And so I did. I met with people that were, boss's boss. They all 2 below the CEO, and just people that I should not have been meeting with as a 23-year-old or whatever it was. And so those were some of like the extracurricular stuff. And that was actually a day job. But the analyst portion and the analyst experience that I got was in most of the day jobs. And it was working with teammates and data and presenting to different people in different departments. And that's kind of where the data visualization came in. I realized that if I had to go to present to the CFO of a division, I could talk for days about the numbers I just looked at, or I could pull up a dashboard, turn my laptop to face them, and then say, "Here's what you're looking for. Do you have any questions?" And they'd say, "Nope, this answers everything." Easy 3-minute conversation. So it was a nice relationship plus analytics base. And like I said, I give them all the credit in the world. They did a great job.
So you hit on some things that it sounds like that program did that is a whole in different organizations that I've done training for in many cases. A couple of things that I've heard from a lot of people would be handled by having a program like you're talking about. One of them is like transparency. Another one is expectations, right? I hear people, like when we talk about what are some of the communication issues that you're having, because most of my training centers are around communication. What are some of the communication issues that you're having where it's causing problems? And one of the ones that I get a lot is, I think a lot of people, especially working remotely, feel like they're a little bit disconnected. Like they know the tasks that they're being asked to do on a regular basis, but they feel a little bit disconnected on like, where do I fit in here? Like you described a program where you kind of got it laid out well in advance for a pretty long period of time, of what the different steps are, what's involved, who you're going to be working with. And it's kind of all laid out in a formalized program. And you'd be surprised, like enterprise, some of the companies that I've worked with are like Fortune 100 companies. And I'm hearing some of these people on finance teams saying, I know all the tasks that I need to get done, but I'm stressed out because I don't know what happens at my next quarterly review or a year from now. What do they expect me to do between now and then for me to advance in my career? And you've got people that they're like, they don't just want to just sit there and do the same tasks, but they're not quite sure how to navigate all that. So I'm curious in the work that you do, have you encountered similar types of communication issues in businesses you've worked with?
Luckily, not too often. That it seems to be more of a corporate situation, which is
The
one
bigger
of the big,
companies?
yep. And,
Yeah.
obviously a reason why people leave corporate, but, a few clients, I think once you get a certain employee count, those things will naturally happen to an extent. And then it's building the processes and the structure and making sure it's known and transparency, all that good stuff to try and prevent it as much as possible. Because I think that is a natural tendency for a lot of organizations that have even something like a middle management layer. Once you get around whatever, 30, 40 employees, and you kind of need that second tier. Things like that I have seen create some disconnect. And like I said, I don't see it a lot, or at least as much as I expected, which is a very good thing. When I do see it, it's you come in with a fresh set of eyes, and you could be day one in business school and be like, oh, this isn't working. And it's just tough
Yeah.
to see from the inside, but they're, not as often as I expected, which is nice.
So you hit on something that I'd like to get your thoughts on, which is at 24 years old, you were sitting in meetings with CEOs. Now, whether those are department or business unit CEOs or the corporate CEO, kind of an unusual situation for somebody that early in their career. So what are some of the things that you learned that you might be able to share with the audience? Because there's lots of people in these teams that I deal with all the time that are taking on, they're dealing with a lot of VPs, senior VPs, sometimes the CFO, and they have very little experience in how to navigate those conversations. So what are some of the things that you learned that you think stood you in good stead in having those kind of conversations?
Yeah, it was definitely a trial by fire type situation, but I'm very grateful for it, and I use those skills every day now. But being concise is a big one. So in those meetings, hey, here's what I've got. This is what you asked for. This is what I'm delivering. And then here are the outstanding items, and simple things like here are the next steps, here, blah, blah, blah. Being concise, I think, really helps as I ramble on about being concise. The other thing is, I'm going to say confidence, but with a caveat, confidence within your lane.
Okay.
Or, at the time within my lane, because when I was having those meetings, I truly was the subject matter expert. Now, I didn't think I should have been. A lot of people probably said, where's the oversight here? I don't know. They worked out well. But the fact of the matter was I was boots on the ground, having that context we were talking about. And I happened to know the most because I was in it day to day. So I had to be confident knowing, look, these are the conversations that we're having. These are the, analytics that I'm seeing, all that good stuff. Staying with that, being confident in that, but then not saying, here's what I think we should do, Mr. Mrs. CEO, that has the bigger picture. It's more, I do this. This is what I know. These are facts, and I'm very confident in them. I am happy to provide recommendations of where things might fly,
Okay.
but I never stepped on the toes of the people above me because they had the bigger picture.
Yeah. So you just hit on something that I was going to ask as a follow-up question, which was, it sounds like a lot of what you did was analyzing the data so that you could develop those insights to make recommendations. But it sounds like there's got to be a lot of awareness on your part and figuring out, kind of feeling out the conversation. How's your rapport with that person? And what's the best way to figure out, do they want me to give them the recommendations? Do they want me to maybe ask some questions and kind of lead them down that road? Were there any things that you developed that were either intentional or that you maybe just learned through trial and error that helped you kind of navigate that more consistently, where you could kind of more quickly figure out, okay, here's what I need to do to communicate that in this specific situation?
Yeah, I had a few tricks. One of them was basically just calling the attention to it. So if I saw something in the numbers or in the conversations or whatever, and knew it could lead to, a strategy change or something that was a bit bigger of an impact, I would just call it out and say like, look, this is what I'm seeing. If you don't mind, like, I'm going to take a half step outside of my lane, and this might make sense if everything else might make sense. And we just kind of soft pitch it out there. And a
Mm.
lot of people were very receptive to that. And I've had a few people, and still to this day, with clients, they say, no, like, please, like, what, you took a half step. Like, what's the full step outside of your line? Like, give us the objective third party perspective kind of thing. So making it known that, like, look, I know that this might work. So let me throw it out there. I can shut up if it doesn't make sense, but also, like, here are some thoughts. If they're wrong, they're wrong. If they're right, great. I'm happy to talk more.
I love that half step out of my lane. That's a great, as you put it, a great kind of soft pitch. Like you're letting them know up front. I'm not saying like this is the only way or whatever. You're in a very soft way transitioning to that and leaving the door open to. I've always recommended to people that, especially in a situation like that, that you go in with the idea like an attorney going into court. And you want to think about what are all the different questions and issues that come up. And let me prepare for every single one of them. And I'm going to have those already in my bag or somewhere, but I'm not going to walk out and just dump it all out. Right. I've
Right.
got a plan and I'm going in with that plan. And it sounds like kind of like your approach was, I've got all these recommendations and insights and all that I could bring up, but I'm going to feel out the situation and kind of see where it seems like they're comfortable with me taking this. Because at the end of the day, I mean, shoot, I was in that position as well, 23, 24 years old and sitting in meetings with CFOs, CEOs, boards of directors and feeling very intimidated, but they kind of almost forced me to say more because it was like, hey, what are we paying you for? Like, you're not
Right.
financial reporting. Like, tell us what you think. And at first I was very timid. And then I finally learned, over the course of some time that, hey, that's really what they want me to do. Right? If they just wanted to report, they could have just ordered it from financial reporting and got the report. They wanted someone to save them some time and go through a bunch of data and just come in with a few key observations and maybe even some suggestions. Hey, I see this trend. Maybe we could try this. Here's 2 or 3 different ideas. And, what do you think type of thing. But that half step outside my lane, I love that wording. That's a
Thank you.
real,
Thank you.
it's a soft way of putting it, but it's clear that, hey, there's more here, right? That half step makes it very clear. This is just the tip of the iceberg, but I don't want to step too far out. Yeah,
Right.
that's really insightful. I
Oh,
like
thank
that.
you. It's worked well. It's gotten some good feedback, and I, you know, I respect people that take big swings because, like average modern day baseball players are going to hit a home run or strike out. And when you hit a home run, it's a lot more memorable. It's not really my personality. I'm much more like, hey, let's collaborate on this. And so that ended up working for my personality, and especially the folks that I was dealing with in corporate world. And a lot of the clients today are right. Like, we're not here to force anything. This is just a thought. And I kind of love to your point, like kind of noticing this trend. I'm not sure if this is a problem, but it's a trend. And people are like, let's dive into that. And they kind of pause the meeting and like, what is this? And so then they get curious too. And then you can kind of have that conversation a lot easier.
So where do you think that came from? That ability to read, that's a pretty high level of awareness for a 24-year-old at the time in what could be a very, very intimidating situation. Where do you think those skills came from?
I've always been the middleman in family, in friends, in like friends asking me for relationship advice, like all that sort of stuff. I just always found myself in the middle, and I'm sure There's some psychologists that would say I'm putting myself in the middle because that's probably true. But I always found myself there. And so I just naturally, I guess, developed or instinctively had this, let me hear both sides. And then the right answer 90% of the time is somewhere in the middle. Like if you want to go to fast food or super expensive restaurant, let's go to the average priced restaurant and that's going to win most of the time, right? Very simple example, but I was always in that. And with very, I'm sure most people's families, they can get all too heated all too quickly. And so being the middle man in a potentially heated situation, friends, family, whatever, it was forced. I had to, all right, let's see both sides. I want to make sure everybody's happy. One of my flaws, you could say, is I want everybody to like me, which is totally true. I do. But there is the positive side of that, of I get to have that perspective of the soft pitch, the naturally collaborative, things
Right.
like that.
Yeah. So I think in that Hexaco assessment, that agreeableness is the one that sounds like you're high in, which like all of those assessments, none of the characteristics are good or bad. But I think what's useful about those is they're helpful in figuring out where to help people focus so they lean into their strengths, right? If you were high in agreeableness, but you were supposed to be negotiating, on behalf of your company, and you were constantly having to beat people down on price, that probably wouldn't fit your personality very well. But for what
Right.
you did, it seems like it worked really well.
Yeah. Yeah. I was lucky to not have to be in that situation here's what I'm doing. Here's what we're doing. This is the way it is.
Yeah. 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 Negotiate. That's always one that I still to this day, I had a conversation with a new client recently. We hammered everything, all the other details out, the day, the time, the duration of the training. We went through the outline and everything. And they were like, oh, this is all great. And then it got time to talk about money. And I was like, God, I hate this conversation. I'm just not that guy. I'm just like, let's just make this work, And
Yeah.
I always pitch it in the form of a partnership, right? Like, look, we're both working towards the same goal, right? You have a training event that you need to put on. I'm a trainer. You need someone to fill a slot to do that training on a particular topic. Okay, you think I might be a good fit, but you've got a certain budget, right? So how do we make this work? What works for you? And then you kind of, it's still that give and take, but I think those kinds of awareness around those things is really helpful to get people in the right seats in different organizations. So speaking
Yeah.
of organizations, we're right about the time that we need to wrap up. So tell me and the audience a little bit more about, so we know what you do, who are the types of organizations that are your ideal clients? Because it sounds like it's not a company like the Hartford, like you used to work for, but maybe like a smaller company with similar wants and needs, but a little different size of a company, different environment. Tell us.
Yeah. Yeah. So I love working with small companies because, at time of recording, I'm a 2-person company. We're bringing somebody else on soon. And hopefully that number is ever growing. But I love working with other small companies. And one of the reasons that I got into this business and started it and all that good stuff was because I saw what the Hartford needed, and my friends, coworkers, et cetera, at other big Fortune 500 companies, they all had analytics teams and data teams and
Yes.
a gaggle of analysts, right? Small businesses still need that level of insight. They just don't have access to it. So I love helping the small businesses.
So how
What is
small?
small? Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So I've got I've got a couple solopreneurs that I work with. The average is probably around 40 to 50 employees. Um,
Okay.
I've worked with really, really strong 20-person teams. I've got 100, I've got 250, I've got a super outlier at 6,000, but most in that averaging around 40 to 50 employees. Industry does not matter. It's much
Okay.
more of a mindset of, we know data is important. We know we got to get the value out of it. We don't have the resources internally to do it.
And who is the person, typically the decision maker, that hires you? The
Either the,
CFO?
yeah, I would say roughly half the time it's the CFO, roughly the other half is the CEO. Once it gets into like some of the bigger companies, chief data officer, somebody like that, is sort of the third most common.
Okay. And industry doesn't matter. So that's important.
Mhm.
Well, what is the best way for people to, before we do that, I'll ask you about like how to contact you and all that kind of good stuff. You do a podcast, right?
Yes. Yep.
Tell me a little bit about your podcast.
Yeah. It's an ever-changing adventure, but it's very Charlotte-based. So as we were talking at the beginning, we both moved to Charlotte. A lot of people are transplants to Charlotte. So we are 4 transplants and a microphone. And so we talk about the small business scene in Charlotte. We've got myself from Connecticut. We've got somebody from Ohio, somebody from LA, and our guests are from all over the place, but we do it in person in Charlotte. And, we support a local restaurant. We do it there. It's a lot of fun. Generally, we have small business owners on there. So we talk small business. We talk new things that are happening. We talk, topically, depending on when we are, but like things like end of year planning, how things should be incorporated, new marketing, things that we're doing, stuff like that. And then also just we have some fun. We talk about the Whitewater Center in Charlotte. We talk about all the good things about Charlotte, and conversations can go in all sorts of directions at any given time. So we keep people on their toes, but the core is small business Charlotte.
Very cool. And
yeah, we got to have you on there.
Yeah, it sounds like it would be a blast.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you have a course that you're going to be putting out pretty soon. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. So this is, it's kind of funny because we're legitimately selling the secrets of how we make dashboards. So it's a little course on just being data driven for small businesses. And it starts off with, here's what data driven means. Don't think about corporate with all these crazy AI, machine learning, data warehouses, et cetera. Think about QuickBooks and your CRM, because that's data for small business. And then how do we take that, tie it to a business goal like we were talking about earlier, put it into a dashboard, make it usable. So the theory is most people want to be data driven. Here's how. The best way to be data driven is to see things visually. So we kind of give you the tools for all that.
And what's the format for the course? Is it a live course? Is it recorded or?
It's recorded. It's an online course. You've got some access to me with questions and stuff like that. Not unlimited, of course, but access to me, but 2 hours of video. So it's a relatively short course, and I think people can learn a lot. And the whole goal of the business, let alone the course, is to help folks be data driven. And this is just another tool in the tool belt.
And how will they be able to access that? Are you going to be on one of the big platforms, or are you just putting it on your own website?
Yeah, so it's our own site. We do it through a platform called Thinkific. Everybody's familiar with that.
Yep.
But we have a page on our website, which is pineapplecf.com, as in pineappleconsultingfirm.com. So we've got, details and screenshots and stuff like that there, and then a link to the course itself.
Okay, great. And so you said you're coming out with a course, so it's not available yet. When's it going to roll out?
It is. Yeah, it is. At the time of recording, we released it yesterday.
Okay.
So once this airs, it'll certainly be live, and hopefully all the bugs will be done at that point too.
Okay, cool. Well, at some point offline, I'd love to pick your brain about that, because I'm working on a recorded course as well, and I've looked at a bunch of different platforms and different ways of doing it. So that would be,
I'd be happy to.
Yeah. Well, I want to respect your time. We're a little bit over an hour, but I want to make sure that there's a few things that I want to make sure we did cover: who your ideal clients are, your podcast, your course. And with that, is there if you had a question to ask of another guest on this show, thinking about communication issues in general, because I try to bring everything back to communication. You've hit on a lot of really good topics. But what is one question you might ask somebody else that would satisfy a curiosity that you have about communication, especially in finance?
Ooh, I like it. It's a good format for a podcast too. I like this. I think it'd be around decision making. So both as a CEO or, a stereotypical decision maker, somebody in the C-suite, how do you make decisions in regards to collaborating with your team and getting recommendations from them? And then vice versa, if you are the team, quote unquote, or working with the team, how do you incorporate their decisions and their recommendations? And what is that? Do you have a framework for that decision making process? And how is that a collaborative thing? I think that in the end helps communication quite a bit if that decision making framework is known.
Yeah, those are great questions. So I've got some people that are on my wish list, a bunch of which are CFOs, CEOs, directors of FP&A. That's a great couple of questions to ask some of those guys. So you will see that on future episodes, because I think the way you frame that's a really the answers to that would be really useful.
Yeah, I'll be tuned in to find out.
You better.
Yeah.
All right, Jack. Well, with that, I want to go ahead and wrap up. Everybody, this has been Jack Tompkins, and you can find him. We're going to put all the information in the show notes, so they'll be easily available. But what's the number one way, easiest way for people to get in touch with you?
Website, pineapplecf.com. All sorts of examples, ways to contact me there.
Easy peasy. That's how to do it.
Thanks so much, John.
That's how to find Jack. Thank you, man. We'll see you guys next time.